Hello and welcome back to the Christian Century YouTube channel. I'm John, joined today by one of our writers, Marc Lousteau, who has written a piece for us called Pastors in Exile about Ukrainian pastors who have fled from the occupied territories in Ukraine. We're going to be chatting about their experience of providing pastoral care. Before we dive into all that, Mark, hello, good to see you again. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, thank you, John. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm based in Budapest, Hungary. I've been here for a couple of years now. I write and report on issues of religion, politics relating to this region, but especially also in Ukraine. I travel around extensively to do that work. But I have also a theological degree, worked as a pastor in congregations, and bring all of those various different backgrounds and experiences into my work in writing for the century.
Awesome. Well, this piece super informative. Reminded us of what's going on in Ukraine in the beginning of the essay. About a fifth of the country you told us is occupied currently. In other words, under control of the Russian military forces, the eastern part of Ukraine. And you interviewed eight pastors who have had to flee from that region. I'm guessing almost everyone watching this video has probably never experienced military occupation before. So based on the interviews you've done, can you tell us what it's like? What is daily life like? I mean, particularly, I think for Christians, Protestant Christians and churches in that area, what has this occupation been like?
It's hard to say with any concrete detail because, it's essentially a closed off territory. The only people who are let in or out are approved by the Russian military and the Russian government. So all of the information that I have is filtered through people who have contacts in the currently temporarily occupied territory. I reported this essay by going to a city called Zaporizhia, which is right on the front line. It's about 10 miles away from Russian forces. It's one of the kind of frontline cities. Hundreds of thousands of people live in this place that's so close to Russian military batteries that people basically just ignore air raid sirens because by the time the sirens go off, the missiles have already landed. If we're talking about an experience of everyday life, that is one of the experiences of everyday life that I think and I would hope that people in the United States could grapple with and make sense of when they read the daily news about Ukraine and what's going on there. In Zaporizhia, the article really got started because I was on this trip to deliver humanitarian aid, and I ran into a Catholic priest named Father Roman Vovik. And he told me that he had served in a parish which is now in temporarily occupied Donetsk province. And he confessed or admitted or just said, remarked sort of off the cuff that he keeps in touch with his old parishioners, even though he was forced out of uh, occupied Donetsk in the early 20 teens during Russia's first incursion into Ukraine when they took over parts of Donetsk and Luhansk provinces. This is before the full-scale invasion that we know about in 2022. So that's really where the impetus of the article got started, this conversation. And I said to myself, if he can't be alone in this, there are other people who have to be keeping in touch with former parishioners. And so I just started reaching around to different contacts, and pretty much everybody I contacted said, yeah, if they had a parish or a church or a congregation that's currently in temporarily occupied Ukraine, certainly they do keep in touch with the people who they left behind.
Yeah, you mentioned speaking to quite a few faith leaders who left. I'm curious why they have left. And you talk about some of this in the essay, but what's going on with the different traditions of Christianity in
Mhm.
occupied Ukraine? Why are so many clergy having fled from the region?
And this sort of gets to the question that you asked first about what is everyday life like in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. Um, I mean, the short answer to the question about how Russian forces and Russian administration are treating churches in occupied Ukraine is that if the church um, takes any sort of ambiguous stance, even just ambiguous stance about about what the Russian government would say is a divinely appointed mission of conquering Ukraine, uh, which ultimately is a matter of religious doctrine for the Russian Orthodox Church and the Russian government. If they take any sort of ambiguous stance on that belief, then they face persecution of various degrees and severities. But absolutely, there is persecution of Christians going on right now in the temporarily occupied Ukraine.
Mm, yeah. So you mentioned that seemingly across the board, these faith leaders you talk to are staying in touch, are providing pastoral care to the congregations that are still there in the occupied region. I know you may not be able to go into specifics, but to the extent you can share with us, this obviously requires technology, which you mentioned in the piece, because they're physically separated from their congregations. What does it look like? What for them to use these technologies to stay in touch with their congregants?
Well, you're right. I can't. A lot of the pastors I interviewed asked me not to go into any operational details about how they keep in touch, what strategies they use, when and how, and on what occasions they do call or send messages to parishioners who remained behind. Um, but they use commercially available messaging apps. There's a sort of banality to this. Some of the apps that we are familiar with or maybe have heard about and read about in the news, that those came up in my conversations. And even more banal media like YouTube and like Google Meets and things like that. People did say that they use those kinds of apps. So that's sort of what was fascinating about this article is that a lot of what the pastors were talking about, people in the US who do just the regular everyday forms of church building, church maintenance, church pastoral care, they're using the same apps. They're doing the same things, but they're doing them under military occupation in these circumstances that many folks in the US would have a difficult time imagining.
Yeah. And though we might have a difficult time imagining certain aspects of this, you do in the end of the essay say there are regrettably some parallels that you notice between situation in the US right now and Russia in recent years and what they've done in Ukraine and you say this comparing the United States to occupied Ukraine draws our attention to what may be a neglected area of Christian response to authoritarianism, pastoral care. I'm curious what you have in mind when you think that U.S. faith leaders may be able to learn some things from these Ukrainian pastors' experience and how they respond to authoritarianism, providing pastoral care in the midst of that. What do you think faith leaders in the U.S. might be able to take away from some of these stories?
Well, I'll try to start global and then sort of kind of scope down to some more concrete examples. A lot of people ask me, there's been a lot of news and analysis about, because I live in Hungary right now, I live in Budapest. A lot of people have said, why is it that many people are comparing the United States to Hungary? Why is Hungary sort of the example of where the United States is heading in a lot of people's minds? And after reporting on this story, I used to say that Hungary is sort of the destiny of the United States if the current architects of the Trump administration have their way. But this article sort of changed my mind. Now I would say, and it's both. I think it's an even more disturbing analogy to make that the United States really could end up like Russia or like occupied Ukraine. Um, the degree of the militarization of everyday life that we're seeing in the United States, the potential danger for censorship, um, the attacks on and the efforts to silence dissent, um, and the attacks on dissenting communities that we see going on in the U.S. That absolutely is characteristic of temporarily occupied Ukraine. And what I would say is that the thing that has kept Hungary from really tilting all the way into a sort of military occupation state is that it's part of the EU. And the European Union has created sort of bright lines that prevent Hungary from going full bore military occupation. The United States does not have an overarching European Union to keep it in check. And that to me is a reality that I think we need to grapple with. That there's no overarching power that's going to come and save the day. Should the Trump administration decide to go full bore military occupation. So that's one thing I think that we really need to grapple with as faith leaders when we consider what kinds of strategies and actions we need to take and the gravity of the situation that we're facing. And that's really what sort of these interviews, that's how these interviews changed my mind and how these pastors taught me over the course of these conversations. Um, Concretely, one of the points that I wanted to make in the piece was just to highlight the ethical and moral dilemmas that people face when they're doing everyday pastoral work in a military occupation society, or to a military occupation society from free Ukraine. Because for a lot of these pastors, they feel deeply called by God to love their parishioners. And yet that love can get those parishioners in really deep trouble. And by deep trouble, we're talking arrest, we're talking punishment, we're talking all sorts of violent repercussions. And that's an ethical problem that is impossible to solve. And so these pastors, I wanted to ask them about how they feel and how they grapple with these problems, what kinds of rationalizations they come up with when they reach dead ends or impossibilities in their experience, and just to understand the path that they're walking, because it's a path that we may find ourselves on in the United States soon enough. And I think we need to have a all hands on deck kind of response to the growing authoritarianism in the United States.
Mm. Well, some sobering thoughts, but important things to be thinking about. Thank you, Mark, for sharing that with us. Anyone out there who missed this essay, the link to it is below in the video description, so please check it out. Also, you'll find the link to Mark's Substack, so if you like this piece, go check out his other writing. Thank you so much for talking today, Mark.
Thank you, John.